Well, good afternoon and welcome everyone to today's webinar. My name is David Godwin and I'm the director of the Southern Fire Exchange with the University of Florida. I'm hosting the webinar today from Tall Timbers Research Station north of Tallahassee. Today I'm excited to introduce our guest speaker, Holly Campbell with the University of Georgia. Over the next hour, Holly will discuss her recent work leading the development of a firescaping module for the Master Gardener program. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Holly Campbell. She recently began a new faculty position with the Warnell School of Forestry and Natural Resources at the University of Georgia. In this position, she supports the newly formed Community Forestry and Arboriculture degree program, undergraduate instruction, and outreach in community forestry and wildland fire. Prior to this position, Holly worked for 5 years as an extension associate with Southern Regional Extension Forestry, focused on urban forestry and wildland fire education and outreach across the southeastern U.S. During this position, Southern Regional Extension Forestry, UGA Cooperative Extension, and UGA Warnell School of Forestry and Natural Resources were awarded a 3-year USDA-NIFA Smith-Lever grant to develop a wildfire preparedness training for master gardeners in the 13 southeastern U.S. states. Holly has continued to manage this project in her new position and looks forward to promoting the project in its final funded year. Much earlier, Holly enjoyed a 12-year career as a landscape gardener. Holly has a BSA in horticulture and an MS focused on forest soils, both from UGA. So, welcome Holly. We're glad to have you with us here today. And thanks everybody for logging in. And just one moment as we swap out presentations.
Again, thanks for that great introduction, and it's such a pleasure to be here and speak in this webinar series and share the project that I've been working on for the last 2 years in developing a Master Gardener training in firescaping or fire-resistant landscaping. And this project would not come to be without numerous partners, including the Southern Fire Exchange, in helping with the design and the development and review of this project. So I really thank all of those partners. I especially wanted to thank Southern Regional Extension Forestry, the UGA Warnell School of Forestry and Natural Resources, and the UGA Cooperative Extension, in addition to all of the regional partners who've helped me over the last 2 years. Also, as David mentioned, this project has been generously funded by USDA National Institute of Food and Agriculture through their Smith-Lever grant. And today is really going to be about highlighting the project, and I'm in the promotion stage of this project, so this is sort of the official rolling out of the project. Thank you, David, for letting me do that on this webinar series. And so primarily in the webinar, I'm going to focus on the components of the training versus providing, I'm not going to really be providing a detailed overview of what firescaping is. Though I will provide sort of a brief overview for context. So again, I'm going to be focusing on the components of the project. But first, I want to provide a little bit of background on how this project, or why this project came to be. So in the fall of 2016, as many of us in the South remember, the U.S. Drought Monitor reported that large areas of our region, including much of the Appalachian Mountain region, were under an exceptional or extreme drought, which was 2 of the most severe ratings. Most of the areas, including where I live in Athens, Georgia, had not rained in over 2 months. So we're very, very dry. So much of the region was nowhere near as lush as what is seen in this image. This is an image of Chimney Tops Mountain, which is south of Gatlinburg, Tennessee. But the image really encapsulates the beauty of the area. And this is an extremely popular tourist destination, including around the holidays like Thanksgiving. So around Thanksgiving, or shortly thereafter, in 2016, Eastern Tennessee was in the same extreme drought situation that much of the southern region was. And there were a couple of folks that ignited a fire. It was an arson fire on top of Chimney Tops Mountain. And that fire in these drought conditions quickly grew out of control. And the fire grew. Though the fire was relatively contained for about 5 days, this really didn't last. Within a matter of a day, all on November 28th, what began as a 500-acre fire quickly spread and traveled 8 miles north via embers and direct flame contact to the city of Gatlinburg. And as within a matter of hours, as embers came into the city and flames merged onto the city, they were fanned by 90-mile-an-hour winds. And residents and visitors were frantically evacuating among downed power lines and trees and flames. Cell towers and internet service were not operating, and downed power lines affected the city's emergency communications. These images provide a glimpse of the roads in and out and the hills surrounding the small city of Gatlinburg. So as the fire continued on November 28th, northwest of Pigeon Forge and Dollywood, it finally began to rain, sort of starting to slow down the spread of the fire, but not before there was widespread damage across the Gatlinburg area. As can be seen in these images, the aftermath was truly devastating. It affected people's lives, their homes were lost, their businesses were lost, and personally, it changed everything for some people, a lot of people. In all, this devastating fire claimed 14 lives. It injured over 170 individuals or caused severe health issues. Over 14,000 people were evacuated during this fire. Over 2,400 homes, businesses, and structures were damaged or destroyed. Over 17,000 acres burned, and approximately $1 billion in damages were incurred from this fire, and it was one of the most expensive wildfires in U.S. history. So the Chimney Tops 2 fire was by far the most tragic fire that burned in 2016, but numerous other wildfires burned across the Appalachian states during that same time, including in Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Kentucky, and Virginia. And this slide is showing some of the smoke from those fires in a NASA satellite image. So wildfires are a common occurrence in the Southeast. They vary year to year, but compared to Western states, the Southeastern U.S. typically has the highest number of wildfires, whereas Western states usually burn the most acres. So this map utilizes National Fire and Aviation Management data, which is also on the website FAMWeb. So, and the data is used to examine the percentage of acres burned by wildfire on a per county basis over a 24-year period. So this is looking at 1992 to 2015. And if you look at the scale, I don't know if you guys can see my cursor, but where it says the bottom 10% acres burned, this is the darker colors. So the darker colors are less acres burned. And as you move towards the orange and the yellow on this ramp scale, color scale, this increases the amount of acres burned. So you see across the Southeast, which is outlined in red here, that there's several hotspots of yellow, orange, areas here down in Florida, up in the Appalachian Mountains in Texas and Oklahoma that have seen quite a bit of acres burned in the last 24 plus years. So this slide contains examples of some of the larger wildfires over the last 13 years across several southeastern states. So though larger wildfires, as seen on the slide, occur less commonly in the region, hundreds to thousands of smaller wildfires occur in all 13 southern states every single year. These fires impact communities close to the fires, as well as those some distance away with smoke. In fact, fires in natural landscapes, we're just going to refer to them as wildland fire, have occurred throughout history in the southeastern region, and they've shaped many of the ecosystems and plants found in the region today, such as the longleaf pine ecosystem, the red cockaded woodpecker, the northern bobwhite quail, the gopher tortoise. Lightning and human-ignited fires are common across the region. Native Americans were observed using fire to manage the natural landscape. Colonists continued to use fire, and fire is still utilized today as a land management tool. Today, it's referred to as controlled burning, otherwise known as prescribed fire, and it's a highly effective and often more cost-effective method for managing vegetation for wildlife forestry and conservation. So also, research now shows that prescribed fire reduces wildfire severity. So prescribed fire is usually referred to as quote-unquote good fire or desired wildland fire, whereas wildfires are unwanted wildland fires. So most wildfires today are caused by humans. A wildland fire becomes unwanted or begins being called a wildfire when it threatens human infrastructures, communities, or other areas that we simply do not want to burn. These areas are referred to as the Wildland-Urban Interface. You will often heard it referred to as the WUI. The WUI can be thought of as a boundary between natural and built landscape. Wildland-Urban Interface communities are at the greatest risk to wildfires. So let's examine more deeply increasing WUI development in the southeastern US. So this analysis was conducted by the University of Wisconsin using US Census data. So looking at one of the fastest growing states in the southern region, Georgia, we can visualize the change in WUI or Wildland-Urban Interface area from the years 1990 to 2010. So over this next series of maps, and I'm going to show you in just a second, observe the change in WUI. So the WUI areas are represented by the yellow and orange colors. And we're looking from 1990 to 2000, and then 2000 to 2010. So I'm going to change the map right now. So we can see over 2 decades that the Wildland-Urban Interface areas have dramatically increased, especially in North Georgia. This trend is occurring across the Southeast, as this region is one of the fastest growing regions in the nation and includes states with some of the highest amount of Wildland-Urban Interface area. What this means is that many communities in the Southeast are at risk to wildfire. Okay, so let's go back. So getting back to the 2016 fires. So during and after the fires, cooperative extension agents and other natural resource professionals were beginning to be called upon to assist communities with requests for assistance. Yet many of us, especially extension agents, felt ill-equipped to meet the needs of the communities directly affected by the fires. Moreover, firefighters work hard to protect homes during a wildfire, but the reality is that firefighters cannot protect all homes. So in the aftermath of the wildfires, extension and natural resource professionals recognized a need for the homeowner to become more responsible for reducing their risk. So I was working, as David mentioned, for cooperative extension at the time, and recognized that extension plays a very important role in communities as a trusted source of information. So my extension colleagues and I felt that there was room for educational and outreach opportunities to help homeowners and communities be better prepared for wildfire, and that a comprehensive education strategy and community level approach was needed. We also recognize that there are a number of excellent programs and resources that are readily available and free of charge to assist homeowners in wildfire preparation. Some of these are included on this slide, like FireWise USA. Several of you have probably heard of this. Fire Adapted Communities. Several people have also probably heard of the highly successful University of Nevada Living with Fire program. And some of you may or may not be familiar with the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety. They've conducted a lot of research, actually their labs in South Carolina, but a lot of research looking at home ignition. Despite all of these great resources that are out there, many residents often are largely unaware of these programs and resources. So we wanted to find a way to further disseminate the information that's readily available. So we're not wanting to recreate the wheel, we just want to further disseminate what's already out there at a community level. So an opportunity came to be in 2017, so not long after the 2016 wildfires. The USDA, National Institute for Food and Agriculture, known as NIFA, their Smith-Lever Special Needs Grant category that year was to look at projects that decrease impact of disasters through the cooperative extension programming. So looking at educational programming. And our office and our partners proposed to develop a Master Gardener training in fire-resistant landscaping, which we refer to as Firescaping, to better prepare southeastern communities for wildfires. And so our hope was that we train them and then they teach their communities how to better prepare themselves for wildfire. So you may be wondering, what are Master Gardeners? Why are you going through Master Gardeners? I don't understand all of this. So I'm going to do a little background on Master Gardeners and a little bit on the cooperative extension. Okay, so cooperative extension educators, like extension agents, that's one example of a cooperative extension educator. So extension educators provide non-formal research-based education to urban and rural residents nationwide. But due to budget cuts, downsizing, the benefits of peer-to-peer learning, extension educators created what are called volunteer education programs to increase their impact and capacity in the community. And the most successful of these programs is a Master Gardener volunteer education program. So the Master Gardener program is a volunteer-based training program, and it's designed to assist cooperative extension personnel in delivering research-based information on gardening and related topics to the public. So though each state varies, the program operates under this basic core curriculum. The core curriculum includes things like botany, physiology, soils, pathology, entomology, diagnostics and troubleshooting, planting and maintenance, and a lot more. In addition to the core curriculum, other courses are also available, and many states offer advanced Master Gardener opportunities. So to attend the program, volunteers pay a nominal fee, which includes a series of classes taught by topic experts, hands-on activities, an extensive training guide, and occasional field trips. And in exchange, Master Gardeners share this knowledge with the public at local and state events like farmers markets and state fairs and classes that they teach. And following completion of the required course that they take, Master Gardeners are considered a trainee until they fulfill a set amount of volunteer hours that they give back to their community. And these volunteer hours are on extension-approved projects. So after they finish those trainee hours, they achieve certified Master Gardener status, and their annual amount of hours to maintain certified status decreases. So for example, UGA Cooperative Extension requires that Master Gardener trainees complete 50 volunteer hours on several approved projects in their first year. And once they complete those hours, then they drop down to 25 hours a year to maintain that certification. So the Master Gardener Volunteer Education Program has been around for 45 years. It's very popular. It's highly successful at retaining volunteers, and volunteers fulfill their required hours back to the community. In 2016, Georgia Master Gardeners, for example, contributed over 190,000 volunteer hours to their communities and states. And 380 new and 2,400 returning Master Gardeners participated in the program. That's pretty impressive. Master Gardener programs exist in all 13 southern states, actually all 50 states, and Canadian provinces. So it's a very popular program. But for these reasons and more, Master Gardeners are an excellent way to reach communities and help serve as a conduit of information on homeowner wildfire preparedness through fire-resistant landscaping or firescaping. So the training we created is called Preparing for Wildfires with Firescaping. This is our logo, and this is our website address if you'd like to go to the training. And so each state's Master Gardener program is going to vary in how the training is defined, but we ultimately designed it as what's called an optional training or quote-unquote advanced training. And so this training would be offered after the core curriculum is completed. Okay, so I've been talking about firescaping. Again, I mentioned in the beginning, I'm not going to go through a very thorough overview of firescaping or even how fire affects homes. So that's something that you can learn in the training if you're interested and you're not familiar with that area. But again, I'm just going to go over the components here, but I did want to do just a very brief overview just to provide some context. So firescaping enables a home to reduce its vulnerability to wildfire by a few primary points. So number one, it involves modifying existing vegetation, so thinning vegetation, pruning vegetation, maybe even removal of vegetation. It also utilizes low flammability plants, so there are some characteristics of plants that make them have a lower flammability than other plants. And also, it recommends using low flammability landscape materials. So firescaping also encourages the creation of no or reduced fuel. So fuel is anything that will burn. In this case, it could be a fence or a tree or a shrub around a landscape. And so these no or reduced fuel areas are areas where the amount of fuels are decreased. So it's also termed a fire break or a fuel break. And this could be an example. Let me provide some examples, like a lawn, a well-watered, well-maintained lawn, a driveway, a dry creek riverbed would all be an example of a fuel break. So a firescape also requires carrying out seasonal maintenance. So this isn't just you create a firescape and you can walk away from it and it's going to maintain its risk reduction properties. No, it has to be maintained seasonally and annually. So some synonyms for firescaping include Firewise, which many of you have probably heard of, fire-resistant landscaping, and creating defensible space. So I wanted to draw your attention to the home on the lower right. So this home carried out several firescaping measures to protect their home. And let's see what happened after this fire approached. So we see that the home survived the fire. I don't know a lot of details about this fire. It could have been luck, or it could have been the measures that they took surrounding their home. So I should note here that each wildfire is different. Firescaping is not a foolproof way to protect a home, especially in firestorms, as we're seeing in Gatlinburg, as well as in the 2017 Tubbs fire in Santa Rosa, California, and the 2018 Camp Fire in Paradise, California that occurred last year. These are exceptional fires that may put a home at risk, even if carrying out firescaping and other defensible space measures. So firescaping will increase the chance that a home will survive a wildfire, and at the least provide better firefighter access to protect the home. So we're going to go over one more slide about firescaping. So firescaping is based primarily on Firewise USA landscape design and maintenance recommendations, which aim to modify vegetation around the homes to primarily disrupt the path of fire. So it's preventing the fire from leading up to the house. So Firewise also seeks to minimize sources of embers around the home by recommending certain landscaping building materials and the placement of potentially flammable landscape structures like a fire pit or propane tank. So this slide displays all three Firewise USA zones and their spacing. On this slide, we see that the three zones surround the home. The first zone, the space between the red line and the home, is called the immediate zone. This zone is aptly named as it occurs immediately next to the home. It's extending 0 to 5 feet out on all sides of the home. If a porch or deck is on the back side of a home, the immediate zone begins at the outer edge of the porch or deck. So no plants are recommended to be planted in the immediate zone. This is an area that is recommended to not have trees or shrubs or any foundation shrubs, especially. I'm contradicting myself here, but Firewise does recommend some low-growing succulent plants like sedums or cactuses because they're high moisture plants and they're less likely to burn, but they still have to be maintained as well. So the next zone, which is outlined in orange here, is called the intermediate zone, which is the area 5 to 30 feet out from all sides of the house, or the space between the red and orange lines on the image. The orange line is the outside border of the intermediate zone. And as you see, there are shrubs and trees in this zone, but they are spaced out widely. And Firewise does make some recommendations on the spacing distances of these plants. And then lastly, the extended zone, which is outlined in green on this image, is the area 30 to 100 feet out from the house and is the space between the orange and green line, with the green line being the outside edge of the extended zone. So looking at the entire image on the slide, you may notice that the density of vegetation increases with distance from the house. For example, the immediate zone contains no vegetation, the intermediate zone contains widely spaced trees and shrubs, and the extended zone contains a higher density of closer spaced trees and shrubs. So now I'm going to switch gears here, and we're going to look at some of the project components of the Preparing for Wildfires with Firescaping training. So there are two main parts to this training. The first part is an online training for extension agents or other educators in preparation for either teaching or hosting a training in their county or community. The second part of the project is a toolbox of resources for teaching the Master Gardener training, and I'm going to go over each of these in more detail in just a second. Also, we conducted a spatial analysis examining high wildfire risk counties in the Southeast with a goal of implementing the training in these counties first, as long as there was a Master Gardener program available. But I'll talk more about that in just a moment. So the first part of the training is a Moodle-based. Moodle is a online content management system, like a course management system. So it's a Moodle-based online educator training, which is hosted on a University of Georgia Extension course website. So the online educator training includes a pre and post test and 5 content chapters on fire history, fire behavior, the Wildland-Urban Interface, assessing wildfire risk, and firescaping. So you see all of those listed here. And this is actually a screenshot of the course page. So chapters 1 and 4 are intended to provide sort of the foundation for what people are going to find in chapter 5 in Firescaping. So I have an example here on the screen. So we're looking at one of the chapters, chapter 3 on the Wildland-Urban Interface. And you see there's a short description and there is a video here. So each chapter has a video, and each chapter also has additional resources if someone would like to learn more. And then there's also a course evaluation that we have participants take. But the video, I'm going to go to the next slide here. Each video, and so this is sort of an example. This is Dr. Alan Long, if anyone recognizes him. He worked on chapter 4, assessing wildfire risk. And he is talking about various aspects of risk assessment. And throughout each of these videos, there's a video for each chapter, or one or more videos for each chapter, there are interspersed these test of knowledge questions. And so they help the participant kind of keep up with what they're learning and just, you know, understand if they're getting all the information. It also helps us understand how much people are learning and helps us sort of look at, you know, modifying these trainings in the future if we have a lot of people not answering certain questions correctly. So once all sections of each chapter are complete, let me step back a second. I didn't mention we also have a pre-test, and then we also have a post-test, and we have appendices. And so once the participant goes through all the different sections of the online training, which takes about 4 to 6 hours to complete, then they can have access to the training toolbox, which is the materials used to teach the training to master gardeners. But before we get to the toolbox, I want to draw your attention to the appendices. So the appendices has 2 parts. I'm not going over the first part, but Appendix A contains additional resources. So it's primarily state resources. So it's resources that maybe Georgia or South Carolina has put out on firescaping. It could also include a state plant flammability list. And so I included as many as I could find online. But if any of you know of additional resources I could add to that Appendix A, like, I would love to be in touch with you about that. So Appendix B, I referenced a spatial analysis earlier that we had completed to look at high-risk counties. And so Appendix B can be used by Extension and other educators to identify where in their state these high-risk counties are. So let me explain this analysis here. I'm just going to give you a basic explanation. I'm happy to talk to anyone more in more detail about how we did this, but this is just sort of a brief overview. So in 2018, my colleague at Southern Regional Extension Forestry and I conducted a spatial analysis in GIS to investigate the most at-risk counties in each of the 13 southern states. And so I want to clarify, we were primarily investigating risk specifically in wildland-urban interface areas. So for the analysis, we utilized Southern Wildfire Risk Assessment, or SouthWrap, spatial data on WUI risk and ignition density. Those are 2 layers that they have in their spatial analysis. As well, we utilized 2008 to 2017, so 10 years, of wildfire occurrence data from FAMWeb, which is the Fire and Aviation Management website. And so from there, we got state-reported wildfire occurrence data, and then we also obtained federally reported wildfire occurrence data from the U.S. Forest Service and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And we were only looking at fires over 20 acres, since after consulting with several fire professionals, this is a number where the fire size becomes more problematic. So combining and querying each of these data sets, we determined the most at-risk counties in each of the 13 southern states. Again, these results are based on fire occurrence and several other data sets over the last 10 years and the amount of wildland-urban interface in each county. So I'm just going to click through some of these states, some of the results of our analysis here. The map was too small to label the counties, but if you're in that state, you can recognize some of these counties, and I'm happy to share these with anyone. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to the second part of the Preparing for Wildfires with Firescaping training. So as I mentioned, once people complete the online training, there is the training toolbox. And so this contains all the resources that would be needed to carry out the day-long training to master gardeners. And so within that toolbox, we have 5 canned presentations 3 hands-on activities. There's a number of handouts that support the training. There's a chapter, which is like a reference chapter that goes in the handbook that Master Gardeners have that they get in their core training. We also have a list of state contacts like state Master Gardener coordinators, state Master Naturalist coordinators, state Firewise coordinators with the state agencies. And then we also have recommended Master Gardener outreach activities. We have several videos that can be used in the training. We have a suggested training agenda, which is seen on the right here. And then we have several promotional materials like flyers and logos that can be utilized to help promote the training. So this is our agenda, as you can see laid out here on the right side. This is a day-long training. So it starts at 9 and it goes all the way to 4. It involves, you can see throughout here, there's presentations. We have presentations that are combined with activities. And we also have videos and we have discussion sessions. So it involves a lot of hands-on and also presentations and discussions. So we tried to make it more interactive. Okay, so here are some of the resources that we have in the training toolbox. I just wanted to show some of the handouts that we use, some of the publications. So we use some of the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety research fact sheets. So this one's looking at home vulnerability with roofing materials. And then we also use Firewise resources, which is seen in this middle image. They have some great brochures and posters that are recommended as part of this training. And fortunately, a lot of these resources are free. And so someone just needs to order them, or an extension agent will need to order them in advance to have them in time for the training, but no cost is quite nice. So we used a lot of these U.S. Forest Service publications, and we have these online on a website, so you can get access to them, but I also have the PDFs on the training. Okay, so I wanted to move to highlighting some of the training activities. And I mentioned that there's 5 presentations in this toolbox. And so when I say canned presentations, these are presentations that can be used. They can be used across multiple trainings. I have presenter notes and all of the presenter recommended outlines or notes that can be utilized or not utilized for each presentation. And the presentations that are in the training are fire behavior and history, wildfire risk assessment, plant flammability, firescaping, and then we talk about a homeowner being able to achieve multiple landscape objectives with firescaping. And then paired with several of these presentations, we have these hands-on activities. So there's 3 hands-on activities, one in wildfire risk assessment, plant flammability, and then firescaping. So I wanted to demo some of these training activities to you as best we can online here. And the one I wanted to start with is the firescaping activity. And this is about a 2-hour-long activity with the presentation. So the activity is about 45 minutes to an hour. And this would be for a large group. And so, okay, so anyway, we go through the presentation. So the participants have been provided a thorough overview on firescaping. They have the Firewise USA handouts that show them, like that's in this image right here, that show them the different zones, talk about plant spacing. So they have a lot of resources that they need. And then we're going to have an opportunity to quote unquote create a firescape. So we want them to have some hands-on experience. We don't just want to talk about, you know, what a firescape is. We want them to actually kind of quote unquote create one. So this activity relies heavily on Firewise USA, and then we also use the Living with Fire resources that come out of the University of Nevada. Okay, so as I mentioned, participants' work is a large group, and they're given a handout, and the handout includes a fictional home and landscape description. So I was going to read some of this to you. Okay, so the location of this fictional home, and actually, why don't we, well, I'm going to show you the image of the home in just a second. We'll just go to it, then I'll come back to this slide. Okay, here's our fictional home. Okay, so our home is in the Appalachian Mountains. It's over 2,000 feet elevation. Typically a cool and moist climate most of the year, but drought has been more frequent in this area. And they've actually had several pretty severe drought years in the past summer and early fall, and a few brush fires occurred. So the home is an older A-frame home with wood shingle roof with a complex roof line, wood siding, wood deck, no gutters, has open eaves, has attic vents, but there's no screens on them. And this is a second home for the homeowner, so it's like a vacation home. The driveway, as we see on the image on the right here, is long, curvy, narrow, and lined with trees and shrubs. Some trees kind of overhang the driveway. The house number is faded on the mailbox, so you can't really even see, who lives here if you didn't know who actually lived there, such as emergency management. And then the house is surrounded by evergreen and deciduous trees, including white pine, hemlock, shortleaf pine, hickory, dogwood, and more. Shrubs include rhododendron, azalea, hydrangea, blueberry. There's numerous trees that overhang the house, and they drop leaves on and around the house. And the teenage son of this house is supposed to keep the leaves off the deck, but spends most of the time on his phone, so the job's not getting done. So the house is situated on the side of a mountain, so the front of the house has a 30% slope. And we didn't go over this, but fire moves faster up slope than it does down slope. So having a home at the top of a slope can increase its fire risk. And then the surrounding landscape is really mountains covered with evergreen and deciduous trees and shrubs. So it's surrounded by thousands of acres of forested landscape. So we've gotten an image of the house here. I'm going back to this other slide. And so the homeowners want a fire-resistant landscape. So I'm reading some of these homeowner objectives now. And this is what master gardeners are going to be reading amongst one another as a large group, because they want to meet the objectives of the homeowner, but they also want to make this fire-resistant landscape. So the homeowners want a fire-resistant landscape. Their instructions to you as the designer is do what needs to be done to firescape the yard, but please make it look beautiful and also consider some of the following points. So here's some of the objectives. So the homeowners want to protect their wooden deck and wood shingle roof because they cost too much to replace. Now this is common. People are not always going to have money to replace flammable materials on their home. So what are ways that they can protect that without having to replace those? They also want to find a place to store firewood and extra propane tanks for their wood stove and grill because right now they're stored under their wooden deck. They want to add a 30 by 30 foot fenced in area that connects to one side of their house for their 3 pet skunks. They were rescued, not taken from the wild. You got to make this a little funny too, so bear with me here. So, and they want to make the driveway fire safe. It's, as we just saw, it's heavily overgrown and it's windy and it would be difficult for a fire truck to get down here. So, and then they want to keep some of the native trees and shrubs in the yard, like the rhododendron. Rhododendron is a very flammable shrub, but they want to find ways to keep some of them without igniting their home. And then the homeowner loves birds. And so there's a few snags or dead trees that are in their yard, and they want to keep at least one so birds can, find worms or grubs or nest in one of the dead trees. So anyway, we have some of those objectives and sort of the lay of the land with the house and the landscape. And then there's also master gardeners will work through like a maintenance recommendation sheet. So as they're going to change things on the landscape, they're going to recommend how to maintain that over a long period of time. Okay, so we just saw the image of the house. We're looking at different parts of the house and the driveway, and then we're actually going to connect this to a 2D landscape. So we're looking at these letters here. Here's the front of the house. Here's the 30% slope going downhill. Here's the home. Sorry. Here is the home here. And here's the arrow with the 30% pointing down slope. Here's the driveway. And you see there's a key here where we're looking at deciduous trees, pine or other evergreen tree. We have a deciduous shrub. Here's the rhododendrons. You can see them throughout the landscape. And we have a fire pit, which is on the deck right now, a propane tank, which is also on the deck, and firewood that's stored under the deck. So the extension agent will have this up on the screen. So the whole group's working together and they're seeing this landscape and they're saying, okay, first thing we need to do is lay out the zones. So we have the fire-wise zones here. We have the immediate zone close to the house. We have the intermediate zone 30 feet out from the house. And then we have the extended zone, these green lines that kind of run off the design here. And so this is a modifiable slide. And so the agent, while master gardeners are working through the homeowner objectives and looking at fire-wise recommendations, will start to look at, okay, we need to move this dead tree from right beside the house because this is a fire hazard. Also, we don't want shrubs, especially flammable rhododendrons, to be in the immediate zone of the house. So we need to look at removing these. And we also probably want to look at thinning out some of this vegetation in both the intermediate and the extended zone here. These brown areas are heavy or deep, like layers of mulch that probably wants to be thinned, need to be like thinned a little bit, especially next to the house. And so there's a number of things like creating the area for their pets, moving the firewood, moving the fire pit out to a safe distance based off of fire-wise recommendations. And so the group will work together and they'll come up with something that's similar to this. So they've created the pet area here using 5 feet of non-flammable fencing next to the house. They've removed shrubbery in the immediate zone and really sort of thinned out a lot of the organic matter on the ground as well as the trees and shrubs right next to the house. They removed the dead tree, but they kept this one out here to the lower left of the screen. And mostly just thinned out vegetation, especially around the driveway. They created a place to put the fire pit and the firewood and store the propane tank that was outside of the intermediate zone, which is what Firewise USA recommends. And so in this activity, they talk about what they've done and why they've done it and how to maintain this through the years. And so that is an example of this activity. And I'm going to move on. The other activity that we have, one of 3 activities, is a plant flammability activity. And so after participants, master gardeners, have gone through the training or the presentation on plant flammability, which is sort of earlier on in the day, they are going to have a great understanding of what makes a plant flammable. And so this publication, which is from them et al., which is Fire in the Wildland-Urban Interface, Preparing a Fire-Wise Plant List for Wildland-Urban Interface Residents. This is looking at different characteristics of a plant to determine its flammability. And it's really based on what looks like a plant key. And I know this is slightly blurry, and I apologize for that. I couldn't improve the resolution of it, but it's essentially a key. And you're going through, and so in this activity, what we're going to do is we're going to bring in cuttings of plants. And this is a small group activity, so each of the group will have like 2 or 3 cuttings of plants. And this is about a 30-minute activity, and they're going to go through with each of their cuttings, and they're going to start working through this key to determine if it's more or less fire-wise or fire-resistant, or determining what its plant flammability is. I know there's a number of terms used to describe that. And so they work through the key with each of their plants, and they come up with this rating, whether it's not fire-wise or it's less fire-wise, and they'll record their outcomes of this key. So this is just a great way to sort of firm up some of the information that they learned in the presentation, have them get their hands on some actual plants and look at the flammability of those plants. And so again, we're just trying to reinforce these. Like, we don't want people just to sit through presentations. We want them to actually do something with the information that they're learning. And so that's really a goal in this training. Okay, so I'm going to shift gears again as we've looked at 2 of these activities. And I want to talk about training promotion. So this is where we are right now with this project. It's the components of the project are complete, and we want to promote it. And our primary outlet for promoting is through the state master gardener coordinators. So this is a position at the state. They manage the program for the state, and they want us to promote it through them. And so I'm creating an email flyer, and we're going to start promoting it and try to see if we can get some training started in the state. And so a lot of it's going to be selling it to the county level master gardener coordinators. So these are people on the ground delivering these programs to master gardeners. And so they are our primary outlet. We're also promoting this to master naturalists. They are also very interested in taking part in the program, because Master Naturalist is another volunteer education program. And so it operates similarly to Master Gardeners. There's often volunteer activities that they do, that they're required to do to give back to their communities. But we also will promote this training to other community groups with interests. So it doesn't just have to be Master Gardeners and Master Naturalists. And so we have several outlets. We want to do trainings at Extension in-service training. So I'm interested right now in training the trainers. I'd like to train Extension agents how to use this and how to teach this in their county to Master Gardeners. I'm doing webinars like this to help promote the training. I've also carried out 10 different conference presentations and workshops on the project over the last 2 years. And so I'm really trying to get the word out that this is, you know, at that time, this is coming, but now it's here. And so, hey, help spread the word, like this training is available. Also, we'll be doing some promotion through social media articles, and newsletters. So again, as mentioned, we did the spatial analysis, and our target areas, ideally, we would really like to focus on these high-risk southeastern counties as a first order in promoting the training. But really, we are open to carrying out the training in any county, because a lot of counties in the region are at risk to wildfire. And so ideally, it's a county that's high risk, that has a Master Gardener program already established, but it can be any county. So let me know if you're interested in the training in your county or community. I'd certainly like to talk more. So lastly, I wanted to talk briefly about how we are going to assess the impact of this project. So for several of you that work in Extension or work on a number of grant projects, part of our receiving this funding and also justifying creating a project at this scale is that we need to demonstrate that it's going to have some sort of impact. And so we created what's called a logic model, and we talked about our different outputs, such as, you know, creating the training, doing webinars, conference presentations, and then how we were going to demonstrate that these were making a difference on the ground. So at this stage, we are primarily in the short-term outcome phase, and we are primarily seeking to increase Master Gardeners as well as Extension educators' knowledge and awareness of firescaping. And with this increased knowledge, we're hoping that they can extend this to their communities. So this is part of our short-term outcome. Also, several Southeastern region Master Naturalist coordinators have expressed interest. So we're trying to expand beyond Master Gardeners in promoting this training, because again, our ultimate goal is to increase wildfire preparedness in the southern region in communities. So that's an ultimate goal. So we're willing to expand this beyond Master Gardeners. So it gets a little trickier as we're trying to measure our medium and long-term outcomes of this project. And so looking at this training and this information being actually implemented on the ground by homeowners, by them carrying out firescaping on and around their home or within their community. We've also looked at trying to measure if there are any reduced insurance premiums and payouts as a result of this training. And then also looking at an overall reduction in fire risk as a medium and a long-term outcome. And this is going to require partnerships with fire departments and fire managers in the areas where trainings are implemented. So I'm going to be carefully tracking where the training is implemented, and then communicating with fire managers in those areas and trying to collect data. We realize that some of this, you know, fires kind of come and go, and they're not necessarily going to happen on a regular basis. So it could be that 10 years later, you know, we are able to see a difference in this project, but I would like to measure the impact and the outcome beyond this grant period, which is ending at the end of next August. So really, we're going to rely on these fire managers. We're also going to rely on Master Gardener state coordinators and volunteer activities that are reported. And so that will be part of our data collection, and we'll combine that with any kind of on-the-ground risk reduction. Okay, so we recognize this can take time, but primarily we are focused on wildland-urban interface areas that have a history of recent wildfires. And I think part of me being here on this webinar and wanting to promote this project is so we can get this started, because ultimately, like I said, we're really trying to help our region become better prepared for wildfires. And I guess I can emphasize that more so. I don't know if everyone in the region, but Georgia has recently gone through another severe drought. We had about a month with no rain, and it started to feel to me a lot like 2016. And we recently got some rain, but this project is still very relevant. Us reducing our fire risk is still very relevant. And I would love if any of you would like to talk to me more about implementing this training, or if you have ideas for how to increase the impact of this training. Thanks so much.
All right, well, thank you, Holly. And once again, if you guys joined us during the presentation today, my name is David Godwin, and I am the coordinator for the Southern Fire Exchange with the University of Florida. And we just had a presentation on a firescaping training program as part of the Master Gardener program from Holly Campbell with the University of Georgia. So at this point, we have time to open up for a question and answer. So if you have questions for Holly, please go ahead and put those into the Q&A tool in Zoom, and we will try and go through and answer those. I see there's already one in there, so let's go ahead and pull that up. And Sandra says, could some of this training be used in the Western states? Holly, what do you think?
Yeah, actually, I've talked to a couple of extension agents in Western states, and we've talked about what would probably need to be modified to accommodate the needs of Western states, but I definitely think it could be applied to Western states. There are chapters and sections that are very southeastern centric, so it would need a little bit of modification.
Mm-hmm. There's a question that just came in from Lewis, and Lewis says, is this being coordinated with the State Forestry Commission WUI programs and staff? So yeah, I'm thinking in Florida, folks with their wildfire mitigation specialists and the like with the different states.
Yeah, so we're not necessarily, we didn't coordinate with them to develop this, but they were made aware that this was being developed. And actually one of the chapters on the Wildland-Urban Interface was presented, this is the online chapter, was presented by Mark Wiles, which is the Georgia Forestry Commission State Firewise Coordinator. Mm-hmm. And so I've also done a training with the North Carolina State Firewise Coordinator on firescaping. And so I've sent out an email, and this will be part of my promotion as well, to reach out then to again and say like, hey, the project's done. We would love to work more closely with you and see if this might be applicable to some of your at-risk communities.
So we had a question that came in from Lillian, and Lillian asked if the online training is open to non-master gardeners. So is it open to anybody at this point? And if it is, what are the next steps if they're interested in checking it out? So
sure. The online training is actually for the extension educators or any kind of educator. So the online training is not actually for master gardeners. The training toolbox I talked about is to carry out an in-person training. So this is going to be not online. So there's two different components to the project. So the online training could be for other types of educators, but also the in-person training for master gardeners could be for master naturalists. It could be for other types of community members. It's specifically set up for master gardeners or master naturalists because they are required to do like volunteer education hours. And so as part of tracking the impact of this project and whether it's actually making a difference on the ground, we are collecting that data. We're interested to collect that data and demonstrate the impact that these trainings are even having. So to answer the question, yes, the online training is open for people other than extension. That's perfectly fine.
So we had a comment that came in from Kevin, and Kevin says you're talking about partnerships with fire departments, and Kevin says your ABCD diagram needs to sync up with fire department ABCD property descriptions. So I'm not exactly sure what Kevin's referring to there, but Kevin, perhaps you could reach directly out to Holly, and if you have some insight on something that might need to be tweaked or updated, you guys could look at that and address it.
Yeah,
We had, go ahead.
I was gonna say that sounds great. Yeah, Kevin, if you want to reach out to me, I'm not sure what the fire department property descriptions are, but I'd love to chat more about that via email.
I had a question that came in from Ryan, and Ryan says, "Are there any costs associated with the training?"
No, it's free.
Cool.
Oh,
Right,
I'm sorry. Let me start over. So the online training is free, and that's for educators to teach the training to a community group or master gardeners. And the in-person training is probably going to have some cost associated with it because it includes lunch. It also includes handouts, and so someone would have to pay for the cost of those handouts. So the master gardener in-person training is probably going to have some cost, but that would really depend on the county and the agent.
Okay, that was the second part of Ryan's question is if it looks like if you guys had talked about what kind of costs might be associated with doing the in-person training for master gardeners. So it sounds like the answer is yes, and it would just depend.
Yes, yeah.
We had another question that came in about whether or not you have any information as to whether or not this is going to be used through the University of Florida IFAS and perhaps down in Orange County in Florida.
I hope that it is used at the University of Florida. I'm part of an in-service training with extension agents at the end of this month with University of Florida, and we're sort of unrolling this firescaping training to Florida agents, and I'm hoping that it'll be utilized there. I know Florida has quite a history of wildfire, and they've had some trainings in the past from extension that have just been outstanding. And so if ours is just a supplement to those outstanding resources that already exist, that would be great. But yes, I hope that it can be part of University of Florida IFAS.
Another comment gets to the possibility of using mechanical treatments in managing vegetation in and around homes. Does the training touch on mechanical treatments, mowing, stuff like that as a treatment?
It doesn't go into a lot of depth, but that is definitely mentioned, especially outside of what's called the home defense zone. So we saw the image with all the zones outlined, the fire-wise zones, and beyond 100 feet, we talk about using prescribed fire, using thinning of vegetation, using a masticator to mechanically remove vegetation, herbicide, grazing, mowing, all of those options. We don't go into a lot of depth, but we definitely mention those as an option.
And does it go into, there's a question that came in from Langford about the idea that some of these buffers or vegetation suggestions could be in conflict with HOAs or municipal codes. Does the training kind of touch on that at all?
It does touch on it. So we have a chapter on combining firescaping with other landscape objectives, and one of those landscape objectives, it could be argued if it's a landscape objective, more of a requirement are HOA rules. And really, what I say is that I understand, like, some HOAs require certain plants to be planted. They sometimes require foundation shrubs, and foundation shrubs are definitely not recommended in a fire-resistant landscape. So how does one deal with HOA requirements? And one thing that I mention is that this is a conversation, that this is a training to hold with some of your HOA members in the neighborhood to talk about, hey, we may be in, or maybe you determine you're in a high fire risk area. Perhaps there's a wildfire that burns up to the back of the neighborhood, and there's awareness and concern and say like, okay, we have these rules in place, but we're at risk to wildfire. So what are we going to do? How can we modify our rules? So to me, if it's a high wildfire risk area, the HOA rules need to be modified, but that's something that the homeowner in the neighborhood will have to address with their HOA. So it's definitely mentioned. It's just we don't have any easy answers except talk to your neighborhood.
One of the questions that I came up with while you were giving your talk was, does it touch? And it sounded like you alluded to that. Does it touch on ideas of home hardening, and so much that much of the research from IBHS and others these days is really talking about ember ignition in WUI and structure loss. And does it talk about home hardening as a component of managing fire risk in the?
Yes, yeah. So we have what's included in the online educator training, but also in the Master Gardener in-person training.
Mm-hmm.
There's, I can't remember which chapter it's part of, but in the online training, it's just called Home Ignition. We have a Home Ignition chapter,
mm-hmm.
and it goes through a lot of the IBHS, which is the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety, a lot of their research in those research fact sheets. I showed you an example of one of them,
mm-hmm.
and it talks about home vulnerabilities and some things that a homeowner could do to modify those vulnerabilities. Now, as mentioned in this firescaping example, a lot of times people aren't going to want to pay to change their roof or their siding, but what they can do is that they can modify their landscape leading up to that maybe wooden roof or wooden siding. But yes, there's a lot of good information in there from IBHS about hardening the home and protecting the home, because firescaping is just one part of creating defensible space. I mean, you modify your landscape and the building materials in the landscape, but you also have to look at the home. You also have to look at maintenance. You have to look at emergency access. And so I actually touch on all of those things in addition to landscape modification.
Great. Well, we've come up to about the end of our time allotment today. So once again, Holly, if folks want to try and roll out some of these programs either through their state master naturalists or through HOAs, which we had a couple of questions that referred to wanting to take this to some HOA groups around their property, around the properties that they manage or might use prescribed fire on, should they reach directly to you or go to that website that you referred to?
It could be either. I would recommend checking out the website, and I should mention the website. There are some requirements that like before you can even access any of the online resources, you have to take a pretest. You don't have to get a very high grade on that pretest, but you do have to take the pretest. And so then you can access the online chapters. And so, I mean, I would recommend checking it out. The pretest only has about 25 questions. And like I said, I think it's only like a 45% passing rate for the pretest. So, and you get multiple attempts. But anyway, I would check it out, but I would also contact me because I'm interested in who's interested in this, and if you really feel like it could be applied to your community, because the project really doesn't have an impact on its own unless it's utilized. So we're definitely interested in who's interested.
All right. Well, your email address is on the screen, and it's firescapingtraining.com, and we put that in the chat window earlier, and I'm going to paste it in here and again in just a second. So thanks again, everyone, for joining us, and thanks especially Holly for sharing your project with us today. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you, David. Have a good afternoon.
Thanks.